The crystal chandelier above the Carroll family dining table caught the light like 1,000 judging eyes. I sat there in my best suit, the one I bought specifically for this dinner, watching Helen's family pass dishes of food I couldn't pronounce. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her smile sharp. She looked at me the way someone might look at a stain on expensive carpet. "Walter," she said, her voice cutting to the polite conversation. Everyone went quiet. "Helen tells us you work in construction management." How quaint. My throat went dry. "Yes, ma'am. I specialize in community project renovations." She dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin. A man with no pedigree, no family legacy, no real achievement to speak of. Her eyes swept the table. "You will never fit into a family of achievers. You simply don't belong here." The silence was suffocating. I looked at Helen, waiting for her to say something. Anything. She stared at her plate, her jaw tight, but she stayed silent. My heart cracked right there at that table. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against hardwood. "Excuse me," I whispered, and walked out into the cold night air. Behind me, I heard Evelyn's voice, low and satisfied. "This is just the beginning." The drive home felt like drowning in slow motion. Helen sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap, staring out the window. The streetlights painted her face in shadows. I gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked quietly. She flinched. "Walter, I didn't want to make a scene." "A scene? She humiliated me in front of your entire family." "She's just protective." Helen's voice had an edge now, defensive. "She wants what's best for me." "And I'm not what's best for you?" Silence filled the car again. When we pulled into our driveway, Helen grabbed her purse quickly, like she wanted to escape the conversation. But something fell out, a cream-colored envelope with the Carroll Foundation logo embossed in gold. I picked it up before she could reach it. "What's this?" Her face went pale. "It's nothing, just foundation paperwork." But the way she said it, the tremor in her voice, told me it was everything. I held the envelope, feeling its weight, and watched Helen hurry inside, without looking back. I didn't open it right away. Part of me didn't want to know. But at 2 a.m, unable to sleep, I sat at our kitchen table and slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a revised prenuptial agreement, dated 3 months ago, with Helen's signature already at the bottom. My hands shook as I read through the dense legal language. This wasn't the simple agreement we'd signed before our wedding. This one stripped away nearly everything. If we divorced, I'd get almost nothing. The Carroll estate, Helen's trust fund, even the house we lived in, all protected, all mine to lose. But what made my stomach turn was the clause about decision-making rights. In matters concerning the Carroll Foundation and family assets, I had no voice. I was written out completely, as if I didn't exist. At the bottom of the document, a handwritten note in Evelyn's perfect script. "Per our discussion, this protects a family legacy appropriately." I set the papers down, my mind racing. Evelyn had been working behind the scenes for months, convincing Helen I was a threat, not a partner. And Helen had signed it without telling me. The document referenced something else too, a future estate plan I wasn't party to. Whatever Evelyn was planning, I wasn't meant to see it coming. 2 weeks later, Helen packed for a weekend retreat. "It's just the Carroll Foundation Planning Committee," she explained, folding expensive sweaters into her suitcase. "Mother wants to finalize the year's initiatives." I could help, I offered. I know project management. Helen's smile was tight. "It's immediate family only. You understand." I understood perfectly. Evelyn had made sure I'd never be immediate family. Not really. After Helen left, the house felt empty and cold. I tried to distract myself with errands, but everything reminded me of how separate my life was becoming from hers. At the hardware store, I was comparing paint samples when I overheard 2 men talking near the lumber section. One of them mentioned the Carroll name, and I froze. "Shame about that Veterans Center project," the older man said. "Promised 2 years ago, still nothing." "Evelyn Carroll made big promises to a lot of people," his companion replied. "Now donors are threatening to pull support entirely." The whole thing's falling apart. My chest tightened. Veterans Center renovation. That was exactly my specialty. I'd spent 5 years managing similar projects before moving here, and Evelyn never mentioned it, never asked, never even considered I might help. The next morning, I drove to the Veterans Center on Maple Street. The building looked tired, its brick facade crumbling, windows covered with plywood. I found the director, a man named Frank, in a cramped office surrounded by dusty files. "Can I help you?" he asked, looking up from his desk. "I'm Walter. I heard about the renovation project." Frank's expression darkened. "You're a little late. That project died 2 years ago when Evelyn Carroll stopped returning our calls. I sat down without being invited. Tell me what happened." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "She came here with big promises. Said the Carroll Foundation would fund a complete renovation, new facilities, everything. We got donors excited, got veterans hoping. Then nothing. She stopped responding to emails, wouldn't take meetings. The whole thing just evaporated. Why didn't anyone push back?" Frank laughed bitterly. "You don't push back against the Carrolls in this town. They own half the businesses, sit on every important board. We just got quietly abandoned." I felt anger building in my chest. What would it take to restart? At this point, a miracle. We just need someone competent who actually cares. He studied me carefully. But Evelyn refuses outside help, says it stays in the family or it doesn't happen. I couldn't let it go. Something about Frank's defeated expression haunted me. 3 days later, I returned to the Veterans Center. Frank seemed surprised to see me again. "I want to understand the full scope," I said. "Do you have the original project documents?" He hesitated, then pulled a cardboard box from under his desk. "Evelyn was supposed to pick this up months ago. Never did." Inside were invoices marked unpaid, structural assessments ignored, contractor notes covered in dust. Each document was a promise broken, a commitment abandoned. I spread them across Frank's desk, piecing together what should have happened. The numbers didn't make sense. The Carroll Foundation had allocated funds. The bank statements showed transfers. But nothing had been paid to vendors or contractors. The money had moved, but not where it was supposed to go. At the bottom of the box, I found a memo on Carroll Foundation letterhead. Evelyn's signature was clear at the bottom, promising full funding by a specific date 2 years ago. A date that had come and gone, without a single dollar reaching the Veterans Center. Frank watched me read it. "Now you see what we're dealing with." I spent the weekend at our kitchen table. Documents spread everywhere. Helen at her mother's house for another family meeting I wasn't invited to. The more I examined Evelyn's paperwork, the worse it looked. She diverted the earmarked Veterans Center funds to cover personal debts, disguising them as charitable expenses. It wasn't technically illegal, just deeply, devastatingly unethical. She'd used the foundation's reputation to secure donations, then redirected that money to pay off her own financial mistakes. The veterans who needed help never mattered to her. They were just props in her performance of generosity. My phone rang Monday morning. Unknown number. "Walter? This is Harrison from the Carroll Foundation Board." My stomach dropped. "Yes. We need to discuss an emergency. Are you available tomorrow afternoon?" I glanced at the documents surrounding me. "I'll be there." "Good. Because right now, you might be the only person who can help us understand what's happening." I hung up, my hand shaking. Evelyn had built an empire on carefully maintained appearances. But appearances crack when someone looks closely enough. And I'd been looking very closely. The Carroll Foundation boardroom smelled like old money and new panic. 6 board members sat around a mahogany table, their faces tight with worry. Evelyn's chair at the head sat conspicuously empty. Harrison, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, gestured for me to sit. "Thank you for coming. We'll get straight to it. Donors are demanding answers about the Veterans Center project. Evelyn has been unavailable. Unavailable or avoiding you?" I asked. A woman across the table, Claire, nodded grimly. The latter. "We discovered significant discrepancies in the funding allocation. We understand you've been reviewing project documents." I pulled out my folder, laying out the evidence calmly and factually. The the promised funds, the diverted money, the timeline of abandonment. I didn't editorialize or accuse. I just presented facts. The room was silent when I finished. Harrison leaned forward. Can this project be salvaged? Yes, I said. With proper oversight and transparent accounting, absolutely. Claire exchanged glances with the others. We'd like you to temporarily oversee the rebuild. You have the expertise, and more importantly, you're not connected to whatever happened here. I thought about Evelyn's words at that dinner. You will never fit into a family of achievers. I'll do it, I said. Evelyn's fury arrived at my door at 9 that evening. She didn't knock, just used the spare key Helen had given her and stormed into our living room. Helen trailed behind her, looking trapped. How dare you? Evelyn hissed, her composed mask completely gone. Trying to steal my family's legacy. Trying to turn the board against me. I stood from the couch slowly. They asked me to help. I said yes. You manipulated them. You're trying to destroy everything I built. Helen stood frozen near the doorway, her eyes darting between us. I waited for her to say something, to support either of us. She said nothing. I'm trying to help veterans who were promised assistance 2 years ago. I said quietly, that's all. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice dropping to something dangerous. You have no idea what you started. I will destroy your credibility. I will make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you are. She pulled out her phone right there in my living room and started making calls. Her voice shifted, becoming smooth and persuasive as she spoke to someone on the other end. Yes, I need to discuss a concerning situation with the foundation. I watched her work, watched Helen watch her mother, and realized this was only beginning. Over the next week, Evelyn contacted every major donor to the Caro Foundation. I knew because 2 of them called me directly to warn me. She was spinning a story, painting me as incompetent and opportunistic, someone trying to take advantage of family connections. But when I met donors in person, something unexpected happened. They saw through it. At a coffee shop downtown, I sat across from Thomas, a retired businessman who donated significantly to the Veterans Project. He'd been skeptical when he arrived, Evelyn's warnings fresh in his mind. But I brought the documents, showed him the actual numbers, explained the plan calmly and thoroughly. He sat back, studying me. She told me you didn't understand the complexity of the foundation's work. She told you I was incompetent. Yes. He smiled slightly. But you're not, are you? I just want to finish what was promised. Thomas nodded slowly. We checked the records after Evelyn called. The discrepancies are real. The diversions happened. He stood, shaking my hand firmly. You have my full support. And I'll make sure the other donors know the truth. One by one, donors chose facts over Evelyn's fiction. Her influence was crumbling, and she could feel it slipping away. Helen started noticing things. Small inconsistencies in her mother's stories. Dates that didn't match. Explanations that contradicted previous explanations. At a family gathering I was invited to, her uncle pulled her aside. She told me about it later, sitting on our bed, her hands trembling. Uncle Troy said Mother's been lying for years. About money, about projects, about family decisions. He said she maintains control through manipulation and fear. Did you believe him? Helen's eyes filled with tears. I confronted her. She got so angry, told me Troy was jealous, that everyone was jealous. She said I was betraying her by even questioning. That's called gaslighting, I said gently. I know. Helen's voice broke. I found something in her study, a ledger she keeps hidden. She pulled out her phone, showing me photos she'd taken, pages of handwritten entries, personal expenses labeled as charitable donations, foundation money moved to cover private debts. My wife had finally seen what I'd been seeing all along. Evelyn wasn't protecting the family. She was protecting herself. And she'd been doing it for years, with Helen's blind trust as her cover. What do we do? Helen whispered. Before I could answer, her phone rang. Her face went white as she listened. We have to go. Mother collapsed at a luncheon. Donors confronted her. The hospital waiting room felt like a stage set For a family drama, none of us wanted to perform. Evelyn's siblings gathered in tight clusters, whispering urgently. Helen paced near the windows, her phone pressed to her ear as she fielded calls from concerned family friends. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was carefully neutral. She's stable. The collapse was stress-related, likely triggered by elevated blood pressure and anxiety. She's asking for family. We filed into her room one by one. Evelyn lay in a hospital bed, looking smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. But her eyes were still sharp when they landed on me. "This is your fault," she said, her voice hoarse. "You turned everyone against me." Helen's brother spoke up. "Mother, we need to talk about the foundation finances." "There's nothing to discuss. The donors say otherwise." Her sister crossed her arms. "They're demanding transparency. Full audits. They want answers we can't give because you won't cooperate." Evelyn's face flushed. "I've dedicated my life to that foundation. How dare you question me?" I stayed near the door, silent. The family was finally asking questions I'd been too afraid to voice months ago. But Evelyn wasn't backing down. She clung to control even from a hospital bed, deflecting and denying with practiced ease. Harrison called that evening. "We're hosting an emergency donor gala. Friday night. We need to clarify the truth before this gets worse." The country club ballroom glittered with wealth and expectation. Donors and evening were filled to space, their conversations hushed and speculative. I stood near the back in a borrowed tuxedo, watching Evelyn hold court near the podium. She recovered quickly, her appearance flawless, her smile commanding. Helen squeezed my hand. "She's planning something." "I know." The board had asked me to prepare remarks, but Evelyn had insisted on speaking first. She took the microphone with the confidence of someone who'd never truly been challenged, who believed her name and history were armor enough. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice warm and gracious. "There have been unfortunate misunderstandings regarding the Veterans Center project. Misunderstandings largely caused by outside interference from individuals who don't understand our family's commitment to this community." Her eyes found mine across the room. Several donors turned to look at me. "My son-in-law, despite his good intentions, lacks the sophistication needed for foundation work. His accusations are based on misread documents and naive assumptions about philanthropic operations." She continued for 5 more minutes, her words carefully crafted to paint me as incompetent and her as the victim of family betrayal. Some people nodded. Others looked uncertain. But then Thomas stood up. "Mrs. Caro, that's not what our independent audit showed." The room went completely silent. Evelyn's smile froze on her face. "I'm sorry." Thomas walked to the front, another donor joining him. Several of us commissioned an independent review of the foundation's finances. "We received the results this afternoon. You had no right. We had every right. Our donations weren't being used as promised." Thomas pulled out a document. "The Veteran Center funds were diverted to cover personal expenses. The timeline matches exactly what Walter documented." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn gripped the podium, her knuckles white. "That's not. You don't understand the full context." "Then explain it." Another donor called out, "Because right now it looks like fraud." "It's not fraud. It's the foundation needed liquidity for other urgent projects." "Which projects?" Thomas pressed. "Because we can't find any record of them." Evelyn's carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. Her siblings looked horrified. Helen covered her mouth with both hands. The entire room watched the Empress realize she had no clothes. Harrison stood. "I think we need to hear from Walter." Every eye turned to me. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment Evelyn had promised I'd never have. The moment I'd prove I didn't belong. Except now. Everyone was waiting to hear what I had to say. I walked to the front slowly, my hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. The microphone felt heavy when I took it from Evelyn's trembling hands. She stepped aside, her expression a mixture of fury and fear. "I don't want to attack anyone," I began, my voice quieter than Evelyn's but carrying through the silent room. I just want to talk about what matters. 2 years ago, veterans in this community were promised help. They were promised a renovated center, a place where they could find support and community. That promise was made by this foundation in the name of Helen's late father. I saw several people nod. Helen was crying silently near the back. Those promises weren't kept, not because the money wasn't there, but because it was redirected. The documents are clear. The timeline is clear. This isn't about blame or revenge. It's about finishing what was started and honoring commitments made to people who served our country. I pulled out a folder. I prepared a complete renovation plan. It's fully funded by restored allocations and new donor commitments. The project can start in 30 days if the board approves. The Veterans Center can finally become what it was meant to be. I set the folder on the podium. That's all I wanted to say. The applause started slowly, then built. Not everyone clapped. Some of Evelyn's oldest friends sat stone-faced, but enough people did that the sound filled the room. Evelyn stood to the side, trembling, watching her world reshape itself around someone she'd sworn would never matter. The board voted that night. Evelyn was removed as foundation director, effective immediately. The motion passed 8-2, her only remaining supporters being people too loyal or too afraid to vote otherwise. She didn't fight it, didn't argue. She simply gathered her things and walked out of the country club with her head high, alone. I didn't celebrate. Watching someone's empire crumble, even someone who tried to destroy me, felt hollow and sad. Helen found me on the terrace afterward, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything, for not seeing it, for not defending you." I pulled her close. "We'll figure it out." But Evelyn wasn't done. As she passed me on her way to the parking lot, she leaned in close enough that only I could hear. Her voice was cold and sharp as broken glass. "I will never forgive you for this." Then she was gone, disappearing into the night, and I was left with the weight of what I'd won and what it had cost. The foundation wanted me to lead the Veterans Center project, to prove myself worthy of the family I'd married into. But standing there, watching Evelyn's taillights fade, I wondered if belonging was worth the price we'd all paid. Monday morning, I stood in front of the Veterans Center with Frank and a crew of volunteers. The building looked less hopeless in the morning light, more like a challenge waiting to be accepted. News trucks had shown up, the local paper running a front-page story about the foundation's leadership change and the project's revival. Carroll Family Foundation restarts Veterans Center under new leadership. The headline read, with my photo underneath. It felt surreal, seeing my face attached to the Carroll name in a way Evelyn had sworn would never happen. The first week was chaos. Coordinating contractors, managing volunteers, dealing with the press. But slowly, steadily, the building began to transform. Debris cleared, new windows installed, fresh paint covering years of neglect. Helen came to the site on Wednesday, wearing jeans and an old sweatshirt, ready to work. She painted walls alongside other volunteers, barely speaking, just present. It was her way of apologizing, of choosing our marriage over her mother's expectations. "Your husband's doing something special here," one of the veterans told her, his voice rough with emotion. First person who actually kept a promise. Helen smiled, but I saw tears in her eyes. We were rebuilding more than a building. We were rebuilding trust, piece by piece. Then Helen's cousin showed up at the site Friday afternoon, looking nervous and purposeful in equal measure. His name was Vincent, and I'd met him exactly once at a family wedding years ago. He approached carefully, glancing around as if worried about being seen. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. We walked to my truck, away from the volunteers and noise. Vincent pulled out an envelope, his hands shaking slightly. "I need to show you something. Something Evelyn was planning before everything fell apart." Inside was a legal document, dense with clauses and stipulations. As I read, my blood went cold. It was a trust revision, drafted 6 months ago, that would move the majority of the Carroll Foundation's assets into a private trust controlled solely by Evelyn. The kicker was buried in Section 12. Helen was completely excluded from inheritance or decision-making rights. Everything would flow through Evelyn's siblings first, bypassing Helen entirely. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent looked sick. Because she was furious Helen married you. This was her revenge, making sure Helen would lose everything for choosing you over family approval. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and righteous. Helen had defended her mother for years, stayed silent when I needed her, all while Evelyn planned to punish her permanently for loving me. "There's more," Vincent said quietly. She wasn't done. This was just the beginning. The next blow came Tuesday morning. I was reviewing contractor estimates when my phone rang. Town Council. "Mr. Harper? This is Phyllis from the council office. We received a formal complaint regarding your use of foundation materials and town permits for the Veterans Center project." My stomach dropped. A complaint from who? Evelyn Caro. She's alleging misappropriation of resources and improper permit applications. "We'll need you to attend a hearing Thursday morning." I hung up and immediately called Harrison. His side told me he'd expected this. "She's not going quietly," he said. "Evelyn still has friends on the town council. She's trying to destroy your credibility before you can finish the project." I looked at the half-renovated building through my truck window. Veterans were counting on this. The community was watching. If Evelyn succeeded in painting me as corrupt or incompetent, everything would collapse. "What do I need?" I asked. "Every receipt, every permit, every piece of documentation you have. Make it airtight. Make it undeniable." I spent the next 2 days organizing evidence. Photographs time-stamped and geotagged. Receipts organized by date and vendor. Permit applications with approval stamps. Communications with contractors. Everything I'd learned from 5 years in project management. Everything Evelyn had dismissed as insignificant when she called me unqualified went into 3 massive binders. Thursday morning, I walked into the town council chambers, carrying those binders like armor. The council chambers smelled like old wood and bureaucracy. 5 council members sat behind a long table, their expressions professionally neutral. Evelyn sat in the front row with her lawyer, both looking confident and composed. Phyllis called the hearing to order. "We're here to review allegations of material misappropriation and permit violations related to the Veterans Center renovation project. Mrs. Caro, you filed a complaint. Please present your case." Evelyn's lawyer stood, launching into a prepared statement full of technical language and serious accusations. They claimed I'd used foundation funds inappropriately, that permits were improperly obtained, that the entire project was being mismanaged by someone without proper credentials or oversight. When they finished, Phyllis turned to me. "Mr. Harper, your response?" I opened the first binder. Every foundation expenditure was approved by the board and documented with receipts. Here's the complete record, organized chronologically. I slid it across the table. I opened the second binder. All permits were obtained through proper channels with town approval. Here are the applications and approval stamps, along with inspection reports showing full compliance. The third binder was photographs. This is visual documentation of every phase of the renovation, time-stamped, showing proper use of materials and adherence to building codes. The council members flipped through the binders, their expressions shifting from neutral to impressed. One of them, an older woman named Beatrice, looked up at me. "This is exceptionally thorough documentation. I keep good records," I said simply. The council deliberated for exactly 12 minutes. When they returned, Beatrice spoke for the group. "The complaint is dismissed. The evidence clearly shows proper procedures were followed throughout the project. In fact, this is some of the best documentation we've seen for any community project." Evelyn's face went pale. Her lawyer started to object, but Beatrice held up her hand. "Furthermore, we're issuing a formal reprimand to Mrs. Caro for filing a complaint without merit, wasting council time and resources. This appears to be a personal vendetta rather than a legitimate concern." I didn't smile, didn't celebrate. I just nodded and gathered my binders. But as I turned to leave, Beatrice called out, "Mr. Harper, we'd like you to consider chairing a new community oversight committee we're forming. We need people with your integrity and organizational skills." I glanced at Evelyn, who sat frozen in her seat, the woman who'd sworn I'd never belong in this town, never fit into circles of achievement. was watching me get offered positions she'd held herself. I'd be honored, I said. Outside, Helen was waiting. She'd heard everything through the open chamber doors. She hugged me tightly, whispering apologies into my shoulder for the 100th time. But across the parking lot, I saw Evelyn's car. She sat in the driver's seat, alone, and for the first time she looked completely defeated. The Caro siblings gathered at the family estate Sunday afternoon. I wasn't invited, but Helen recorded the conversation on her phone, playing it for me later that night as we sat in our kitchen. "Mother, this has to stop," her brother said. "You're destroying relationships, destroying your reputation. We want to help, but you have to accept that things have changed." "I don't need help." Evelyn's voice was brittle. "I need my family to support me against that man who's stolen everything." "Walter didn't steal anything." Helen's voice came through the recording. "You lost it by lying and manipulating people, by trying to punish me for marrying someone you didn't approve of. I did everything to protect you. You did everything to control me. There's a difference." The argument escalated, voices overlapping. Finally, Helen delivered the line that ended it. "I can't have you in my life anymore. Not like this. Not until you get help and take responsibility." There was a long silence on the recording. Then a sound I'd never expected to hear. Evelyn crying. Not delicate tears, but deep, broken sobs. The first crack in armor she'd worn for decades. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "My position, my reputation, my daughter. You lost us when you chose pride over honesty," Helen said gently. "And until you understand that, nothing will change." The recording ended. Helen looked at me with red eyes. Was I too harsh? "No," I said. "You were honest." 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived at our house. Cream-colored, expensive paper. Evelyn's perfect handwriting across the front. Helen stared at it like it might explode. "Open it," I said. Inside was a single page, handwritten. "Walter, I'm writing to request a meeting. I realize you have no reason to trust me or grant me any consideration. I haven't earned it, but I'm asking anyway. I need help fixing what I've broken. Not my reputation. I understand that may be beyond repair, but the foundation, the community relationships, the damage I've caused to people who didn't deserve it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for guidance. Please, help me fix this. Evelyn." Helen read it over my shoulder. It could be a trap, or it could be genuine. I set the letter down. Either way, I think I should find out. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. Evelyn arrived 10 minutes early, sitting alone at a corner table. She'd aged in the past months, new lines around her eyes, grays showing in her perfectly maintained hair. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I'm listening." She took a breath. "I want to make things right. I've hurt people, damaged relationships that mattered, the veterans who were promised help, the donors I lied to, my family." Her voice cracked. "Helen especially. Why should I believe you? You shouldn't. I haven't given you reason to." She slid a document across the table. "This is a statement admitting my financial mismanagement and ethical violations. I'll submit it to the foundation board if you help me create a plan to repair the damage." I read the statement carefully. It was thorough, honest, painful in its admissions, but I wasn't naive enough to think one piece of paper erased years of manipulation. "If I help you, it's on strict conditions," I said. "Full transparency, actual accountability, and you step aside permanently from foundation leadership. No advisory roles, no special privileges. You become a regular donor like everyone else." Evelyn's jaw tightened, pride warring with desperation. Finally, she nodded, agreed. "And you work to repair your relationship with Helen, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, honest behavior over time. I want that more than anything." Over the next 2 hours, we outlined a plan. Evelyn would fund a scholarship program for veterans' families. She'd work with the board to establish better oversight mechanisms. She'd personally apologize to every donor she'd misled. It was humbling work, the opposite of everything her ego had demanded for decades. As we prepared to leave, Evelyn looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Respect, genuine and earned. You could have destroyed me completely, she said quietly. You could have enjoyed watching me fall. But you didn't. Why? I thought about that first dinner, her cruel words, the months of manipulation and attacks. Then I thought about Helen, about the veterans counting on that center, about building something better than revenge. Because destroying you wouldn't have fixed anything. This way, maybe something good comes from all of it. The Veterans Center reopened on a perfect Saturday morning in June. Over 200 people gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, veterans in dress uniforms, community members, donors, press. The building gleamed in the sunlight, transformed from abandoned ruin to thriving community hub. Harrison gave a speech about perseverance and integrity. Frank, the director, spoke about promises finally kept. When they called my name to cut the ribbon, Helen stood beside me, her hand in mine, united again after months of repair. The crowd applauded as the ribbon fell away and the doors opened. Veterans filed inside, exploring the new facilities with wonder and gratitude. One of them, an elderly man with faded tattoos, shook my hand with tears in his eyes. "Thank you for not forgetting us," he said. Evelyn stood in the back of the crowd, alone but present. She kept her word, submitting her statement to the board, beginning the long process of rebuilding trust. When she caught my eye, she nodded once, acknowledgement without expectation of reward. After the ceremony, the Carroll Foundation board approached me. They offered me a permanent advisory position, the same position Evelyn had once held, the same space she'd sworn I'd never occupy. I accepted, not as victory over her, but as commitment to the community that had finally accepted me. That night, Helen and I sat on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Her head rested on my shoulder, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in months. "You proved her wrong," she said softly. "I proved myself right. I corrected. There's a difference." The man Evelyn swore would never fit and had become the cornerstone of the family's restored honor. Not through revenge or cruelty, but through integrity and persistence. And in the end, that mattered more than any approval she could have given. I belonged because I'd earned it, and that was something no one could ever take away.